start the Baywatch theme.
Yeah, before we pressed play, you were playing the Baywatch theme for some reason by Jimmy Jameson.
Do you want to know the reason?
Yeah, why were you playing that?
The same reason that they chose it for the show. It gets people amped up. To see the Hoff.
Yeah. So you were playing that to amp yourself up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's a good song.
On a rainy Sunday.
Yeah. I was thinking more about how we should get the rights to Pain for Pleasure for this episode, which I think is Sum 41. I don't think that's the actual name of the song.
No, I think it's is it?
Pain for Pleasure.
Yeah.
That's really just cuts in at the end of the song.
Oh, yeah. Well, you might be able to afford it. I don't think.
What do you mean? Sum 41 is thriving.
Yes.
Actually, they were terrible when I saw them live.
That's what I've heard.
Banging songs on the radio, terrible live.
Mm-hmm. So, Pain for Pleasure.
Yeah, I wasn't singing that to amp myself up, but more because I thought that was a suited song as an intro to today's episode.
Which is about
pain and pleasure. Actually, it's more about pleasure without exertion, I would say, is a better, more appropriate title for the episode.
Mm-hmm. Experiencing pleasure without having to do anything for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you consistently do that, what ends up happening to you and your brain and the whole human race, basically.
Not to get too scary, but yeah. Well, we've talked about this in previous episodes, alluded to it in even the last page, but just how people's dopamine systems are all fucked up and how that's an important, when you're discussing the instruction manual and how to sort of have like a happy, healthy, fulfilled life, like something that would be important to know is about dopamine regulation and how to optimize that, because a lot of people have piss poor dopamine regulation these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's probably just the most common pitfall I see in myself. Again, we did Be Curious in Your Blind Spots at the end of July.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like after Beer Fest, I think. And all the things I was saying in that episode, as far as like feeling gray, unmotivated, not knowing why, having a hunch that it has to do with, you know, what I'm doing on my phone,
mm-hmm.
and experiencing pleasure without having to go out and work for it.
Right.
These little 10-cent pumps of gas into the car, and wondering why the car isn't running long and smoothly here.
Right.
So this is something that, yeah, I've noticed in myself, and then wanting to fix it because I know I'm not feeling my best, and then gathering more information because this information is being put out there by people that are actual neuroscientists and biologists and doctors and people that are a whole lot smarter in this subject than I am,
mm-hmm.
and then taking that information and applying it to my own life and realizing that, oh yeah, there's something here big time, and there is so many studies done on mice and rats and getting more into humans now about what these dopaminergic substances or dopaminergic behaviors are doing for us.
Mm-hmm. How we're stimulating our dopaminergic pathways and then depleting them or burning them out, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, and we even talked about this a little bit in the last page, our inadvertent Christmas episode, where I had kind of asked you what like maybe one of the most common reasons of why you're finding people are reaching out to you. And you said it's a lot of, I'm feeling unmotivated, I'm feeling gray, I'm having a hard time just kicking myself into gear.
I want to fix this, or I know I need to fix this, but I don't even want to, and I don't know why. Mm-hmm. And
right.
that I think is a feeling that a lot of people are noticing.
Right.
In themselves.
Well, interestingly, just in doing some preparation for this episode, I think, if I recall correctly, it was about 6 months ago, but when we did the Be Curious in Your Blind Spots episode at the end of July, which is where we kind of prompted people to do the like No Social Media Mondays challenge, I got a little bit into the like nerdy pathophysiology of dopamine a little bit, again, just scraping the surface compared to so many other resources that are more in-depth and out there. But doing a little bit more prep for this, it really made me have a better understanding about how I think in common culture, like for the layperson, we think of, I get a reward and it gives me a boost of dopamine. Like the dopamine is the reward. So whether that's in addiction, when we're talking about drugs, whether that's from Instagram, TikTok, whether that's from food, whether that's from porn, sex addiction, like there's so many actions and behaviors that give us that quote unquote dopamine hit. But what I've become more aware of in just preparing for this particular page is how much dopamine is actually more related to the motivation as opposed to the end goal itself. So we were watching, again, you know, everyone knows we're big fans of Andrew Huberman, but he has actually, it's not just specific to him. There's a YouTube segment that's called After School.
Yeah, the channel is After School, SKOOL, and basically it is these animated videos where someone is creating this animation to go along with, you know, Huberman's words, or
any scientist,
enter scientists, or you know, whatever, David Goggins' words, or a lot of just like educators. But instead of just listening to their words, they're creating these animations which really help you to understand it and stay interested in it. But yeah, I'll maybe include a link to that. That video.
If there's a way we can do that, that would be helpful.
It's called How to Maximize Dopamine and Motivation, and it's on that After School SKOOL channel, and it's 11 minutes long, and it basically
really just sums it up what we're trying to talk about here.
It really hits home, just because the way what they're drawing is, I think, what we're all seeing as far as just us looking at our phones and just getting these little hits of pleasure over and over and over while our world crumbles around us. And it's a really great video to get knowledge with the emotional connection to it. So you actually, you get some leverage by seeing maybe how you look in a cartoon.
Right. Well, what they talk about and sort of illustrate in this, I guess in this after school special or mini video is the problem isn't the pleasures themselves. The problem is that pleasure's being experienced without prior requirement for pursuit. And that's actually what's terrible for us. So it's not per se, I mean, yes, do like food addiction and overconsumption of sugary substances and gambling and all of those things have negative consequences for us, yes, but what's actually fucking us up is being able to do that without having to go through some hardship or a pursuit to get to that reward. Yeah,
because there's an abundance of pleasures. Uber Eats, porn on your phone, scrolling TikTok, scrolling Instagram, things that keep you just like the bare minimum of entertained, those 10 cents of gas, and you don't have to do anything for it except for move your fingers slightly.
Right.
So you can have all these things so it's not the things, it's like how we are getting them. It's
like they talk about how dopamine itself is not the reward. It's actually more involved in the build up to the reward. And then, but when you're getting that reward without the build up, yes, there's still dopamine involvement in that pleasure sensation, but at that point it's almost like hits to your opioid receptors more than it is to your dopaminergic receptors. So now more than ever, as again people way smarter than us are doing research in this domain, they're finding how much more how much more dopamine has to do with the actual motivation, which actually makes complete sense to what we were talking about previously of if you yourself, like, you know, you've said like, oh, sometimes I feel like this, where it's like gray or it's hard to get motivated, and then you're seeing that in your clients. And we think it's related to dopamine, which it is in some capacity. And it's like, I'm going to keep doing this behavior because it feels good and I get the reward. But the grayness actually comes from the depletion of those dopamine systems in the pursuit.
And it stops feeling good. That goodness gets less and less and less and less. And then you're basically doing it to keep yourself distracted. You're doing it just to keep getting those like little 10-cent hits. So it's not even good. It's just to try to get this like little baseline of this neurotransmitter. So I don't know. How do we, because again, we're not scientists or neuroscientists or neurobiologists. There's some great info already out there, which we can kind of help direct you to. And we already did that a little bit. But for us, why are we doing like this page? What can we have to offer that might be a little bit different, that might hit home differently? Is it us actually talking about how it's impacting our lives and what we're doing to fix it and what we notice in ourselves? Because, you know, you can talk a little bit about the science and stuff, but to make this different from all those other ones, what can we offer here? What can we do for that?
Well, and again, this isn't my wheelhouse by any means. I'm just interested in it, partially from you, and partially because I think this is something that everybody can recognize in themselves. But I'm always interested in evolutionary science a little bit of like, okay, why do we have these receptors to begin with, and how come they can be hijacked so easily? And it was interesting because in reading an article preparing for this page, and again, it wasn't like a randomized control trial or anything like that. It was just a scientist who kind of wrote like an opinion page article, I guess. But he was talking about how one of the reasons evolutionary wise we even have these pathways to begin with is because it brings joy to life. Like it literally bringing joy to life is what makes us want to reproduce and like keep our species going, right? And I think it's always interesting to come back, or at least for me, to come back to the why. Like if you think about anything in our body, like an example would be like wisdom teeth, for example, right? It's like, why do we even have wisdom teeth anymore? We don't actually really need them anymore. We needed them from back in the day when we were like hunter-gatherers and eating raw meat, because we needed it to like break down raw meat. Like we don't have a use for that anymore, but it's still there. And I'm sure over like lots of people get them removed, and I'm sure over time
like the
they'll
tailbone.
Yeah, exactly, right? Same thing. Or you know, one of my favorite examples of this is the amygdala, which is like a part of your brain that has some function in like fear response. And there's a lot of interesting research that comes out now about how for a lot of people who have anxiety, or at least a proportion of people who have quote unquote anxiety, it's like dysregulation of this system. But really the reason it was there to begin with is that sense of like when you're being pursued or hunted, or when there were like threats out in the environment, like you're being chased by a tiger, right? It's like in those cases that's a good thing. Like, you should have a warning system that's like alert, alert when you feel like the little hairs go up on the back of your neck or something like that. It's like, you're being watched right now. You should feel anxious and on high alert.
Yeah.
But in common society, it like that sort of gets overpowered and revamped and used in a different way, because we're not being chased by tigers anymore, at least in Canada anyways, right? So it's interesting that, to me, we have these dopamine systems that originally, as per what this guy is saying, like, perhaps there's a reason there of just feeling joy to want to keep
do
the
anything,
human,
the drive,
the drive,
motivation.
right? Like, to keep the human race going, which makes you want to reproduce, which makes you want to, like, create offspring that you can love and, like, nurture and all of that stuff. And I do think that part of that is still the reason while that's there. But now we have these systems that in, current 2023, where, you have Uber Eats at your disposal, and you have gambling apps, and there's a lot of drugs that are legalized or on the cusp of becoming legalized, or even if they're not, they're pretty easy to get access to anyways. Or just TikTok and, like, all these things that give you these quick dopamine hits. It's like, there's always a reason why these systems exist.
Yeah.
And so remembering why they exist, and can we come back to that a little bit, but also understand how it's so easy that they have now morphed, because we don't necessarily need them now in the same context that we did originally, but they're still there just because of, like, tens of thousands of years of evolution.
And that's not a new thing.
No.
Like, there's stuff that evolves where it's useful for humans,
Of course.
and then eventually, as society moves on and technology moves on, it no longer is beneficial to us. So there's a lot of stuff just in the last, like, 50, 60 years where it's like, if you're still doing it that way, you're probably not, it's not an optimized way of living. You're probably not setting yourself up for success that way. So the knowledge of knowledge is a great way to get yourself out of that.
Right. So knowing that so to answer your question, or I guess go back to it, is like, what can we add to it, and why is this important, is a little bit of the nerdy science of, like, why this exists, but also being informed of why it existed originally, and now how can we sort of optimize that in current times, that knowledge, I guess.
And just how to apply it, like, in real life, from a normal person applying it in their life.
Right.
And obviously I work with people, and I work in the business of pain. when it comes to personal training, like when we were in the car a couple days ago, and you were talking about how hairdressers will have, like, a cancellation policy, especially, like, over the holidays, because it's like, or
a cancellation fee.
So people, get busy and they cancel a lot more these times of year, and that's for something like going to get your hair cut or your hair did,
most women
or your hair.
Enjoy,
most people enjoy that. So if you're thinking about doing hard workouts in middle of December and the 21st and the 22nd and the 23rd, so many people mail it in. So many people are like, I'll see you January 8th and all that stuff. So realizing that the avoidance of pain and the moving towards pleasure is something that we've kind of done since the beginning of transitioning from apes and monkeys to humans. But now that we have so little pain in our lives and we have an abundance of pleasure, now we actually almost have to do the opposite. We have to go back and volunteer to put ourselves through hard shit to get the pleasure back. And that's a huge reason. That's another big reason why ice baths have exploded. And it's not that, like, the cold shock proteins and all that stuff is making us feel better mentally. That's part of it. That helps with the physical side. but the release of dopamine is because it's fucking painful. The putting yourself in there for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes in freezing water, that's painful.
And choosing to do that, like voluntarily being like, I'm going to submerge myself in this super uncomfortable
it's the
environment.
pain that actually is releasing the dopamine there, and that's a 250% increase for a couple hours, right?
Yeah, like 2 to 3 hours.
I'm not pulling these numbers out of my ass. These are studies that we looked up beforehand. So I think that's what we have to do as a society, is choose, volunteer to put ourselves through some painful things every day, not banging your head against the wall, but choosing like productive painful things like working out, like cold showers, like cold baths. There's a Mark Twain quote, which is, eat a live frog first thing in the morning.
This has been your favorite quote over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Most days you're like, I ate a live frog today.
Eat a live frog first thing in the morning, and nothing worse will happen to you the rest of the day.
Right.
And that goes with like, yeah, if you do hard shit, you're going to be able to handle the rest of your day, but it also it does that because it's having an impact on your brain chemistry.
Right.
So as we learn more and more, like that's what we're going for here, to choose to go into pain, productive pain, because it allows you to feel more pleasure.
Right.
As opposed to this like low bottom of the barrel dopamine hits where you get these little like, oh, that's a cute video, oh, look at that. Anybody who sends me little Instagram videos, a couple of my friends know this, but I don't respond. And if I do respond, it's like a sarcastic like, amazing, thank you very much. Just because I see it in myself where it's like, yeah, I don't want to just get these little hits of cute videos. I want to earn my pleasure by doing hard shit.
And I feel like so far we've talked about it in the context of physical pain or discomfort, like when you're talking about ice baths or hard workouts. But and this is just a opinion / guess. I haven't actually worked out or looked up any research on this, but I would hazard it goes the same for putting yourself in like mental discomfort. Which also comes a little bit more into like focus and not distracting yourself and focusing on like long span attention tasks, I suppose. But even, meditating for 10 minutes in the morning, that's uncomfortable for a lot of people, right? Like having to sit in silence before you pick up your phone and either do some reflection on things that either went well or did not go well over the last day. Like that's a mental sort of discomfort before you reach for your phone and get the quick dopamine hits of cat videos. Or even, some long-term attention span activities like reading a book, like reading a chapter of a book for 20 minutes as opposed to, scrolling through TikTok or whatever your social media dopamine hit of choices. I
Getting some knowledge.
Right.
Some
But that's not physical pain, but that I think comes back to the pursuit more of what we're talking about. Like I have to intentionally put in some work to pursue just pursuit.
It's almost like your nutrition. It's like how are you getting your nutrition? Are you putting in some work to make some good food? Or am I just eating sugar and fast food where it's like those quick hits, they taste great, and then I feel like shit. The same thing with like how do you top up your mental diet? How do you get your knowledge and your entertainment? Do you read books? Do you watch videos that are going to help you? Or are they just entertaining 2-minute videos?
Or even, like, I mean, I would argue even watching a full actual video of
Or
something.
or a full movie or TV show.
Yeah, that's what I
yeah,
mean. Like watching a full movie from the 90s or
Yeah.
something like that actually lasts an hour and a half to 2 hours, as opposed to just quick 2-minute
Yeah,
videos online.
something where you feel like almost accomplished, like you're using your time to better yourself, or at least to not just run the clock out.
So earlier this year, actually when we were doing a bunch of traveling earlier this year, I downloaded an audiobook that I'm sure most people have heard of. It's pretty popular. It's called Dopamine Nation.
Dopamine
Nation.
There
Sorry,
it is.
I'm speaking today. Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke. And so, as you can imagine, it's actually very well done. It's a healthy mix of talking about the science behind, dopamine, but also because she's I believe a clinical psychologist, like talking about some, human examples and patients that she's had, and how, talking about their stories and how she's helped guide them to like replenish and change their dopamine circuits through therapy and behavior modification. But she talks about an acronym for how to change your dopamine circuitry, and the acronym is actually dopamine. So the D's, I'll go through it, and then it's just, if you're looking for tangible protocols or skills of how to replenish your dopamine, this is something that she recommends. It's pretty straightforward, but I mean, I'm a sucker for a good acronym. So dopamine. So the D is for data, O is objectives, P is problems, A is abstinence, M is mindfulness, I is insight, N is next steps, and then E is experiment. So when we're talking about data, it's the first couple are more just a recon mission and like self-evaluation of your addiction or your I guess your behavior that you want to change, your self-limiting behavior. So when we talk about D for data, she just encourages you to think about what drug you're using, how much and how often, and drug doesn't necessarily have to be a pharmacological drug. Again, it could be social media.
Some kind of addiction.
Yeah, an
behavior.
An addictive behavior. Yeah. So what it does is this just kind of gives you an overview of like the gravity of the situation, like what we're actually dealing with. And like most things, we've talked about this in a few other episodes. I don't think she specifically said this, but I would be a big fan of writing this down. Like if you don't say things out loud to other people or don't put it in writing, it's kind of easier to skim over it and not get into it in the level of detail that you sort of need to make it real and tangible. So as you're going through this exercise, if you choose to, I'd recommend writing it down.
Can I jump in there?
Sure.
So yeah, I used this analogy in the past, but to go up into the press box and watch the hockey game for one night, as opposed to always being at ice level on the bench playing the game. Like, put yourself in that press box. And a question to kind of put yourself in that press box is, when you go to the shitter and you bring your phone,
shitter's full,
what are you opening first on your phone when you're on the toilet? And that's probably going to tell you what you spend your most of your time on.
While we're pausing here to talk about
shitter don't lie.
This is something you taught me recently that I was not aware of as somebody who's not overly techie, but there actually are ways, at least if you have an iPhone, I'm sure Samsung and other devices have a similar way you could find this information. But do you want to maybe talk people through on an iPhone how they can look at their pickups,
their screen time,
and all of that? Yeah, this
is something that I resisted for a good while. I think that it's only been available for the last few years.
Okay. I just found out about it like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, so. I just kind of turned it on finally in the last month or two. But basically, if you have an iPhone, I haven't updated my iOS, so maybe it's a little different if you haven't updated one. But basically, you go to your settings and you scroll about like midway, and there's a part that says, there's a tab that says screen time. You click on that, you turn it on, and then from there, there's a whole bunch of info you can kind of look through, and some of the really like valuable things that I find is it's not just like daily screen time, because if you're just looking at your daily screen time and taking it for face value, you're not really getting any information. Because if I have like my Spotify playing music, that's going to be adding to screen time. If I have my clock, if I have a timer, if I'm meditating and I set it for 30 minutes, my timer, that's counting towards my screen time.
And we've tested this where because I do a lot of my yoga practices guided like through my phone.
Yeah.
It will say that I've had that tab open for 45 minutes to an hour, and it counts that as screen time, but really I'm actually doing physical activity following a video.
Yeah, so you're not looking at that. Yes, there's some good stuff. It's like 8 hours, what the hell? But you're more so, what you want to click on is like see all activity. And then it's going to go through like the week and the day, what apps you use the most and how many minutes or hours you've spent on each of them. So, you know, if like today I have my thing open right now. Today, Instagram, 8 minutes. Safari, 8 minutes. The Score, which is, you know, sports app, 6 minutes. Pretty good, right? But as I go down, you can also see pickups. So there's a whole new part of information that says pickups, and that means how many times you picked up your phone and opened it. So if you're like at 200 or 300 pickups, you can just imagine somebody constantly picking up their phone, scrolling through it for 5 minutes, putting it down.
That's the equivalent of the rat pressing on the button for the little food pebble.
Yeah, like that's a shit ton of pickups. If you're getting like 200, 300 pickups, that means basically any free second you have, you're picking up your phone immediately. And then what it also will tell you is first used app after pickup.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting
So
one.
that's really going to kind of pinpoint where your addiction is. If you have any addictions to certain apps or behaviors, what you do first after picking up your phone.
Pornhub.
Right? It'll show you. You might want to do this by yourself.
This is a solo reflection exercise.
You know?
We don't want to be responsible for any divorces over here.
But like, yeah, so that's really gonna help put you in that press box to see what you've been doing. And yeah, it's gonna be uncomfortable, but if you actually do want to make some changes, if you are noticing like, I've been shit at my job, I haven't been working out, I don't even feel the drive to work out, my relationship's going down the drain, I don't feel good about myself, I'm not going to be able to enjoy any like these holiday parties, Christmas, like January, New Year's, I have no motivation or no compelling future. If any of those things are like present in your life and you actually want to improve them, turning your screen time on and seeing what the hell you've been up to.
Again, you got to make yourself squirm. You
gotta
squirm. Make yourself cringe a little bit.
Yeah. And then when knowledge of knowledge, that might not make any sense, but
I think no, it makes sense. You have to learn, like, it's kind of the same as you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
You can only live blissfully in ignorance for so long until you learn how to do better.
Yeah.
Like, you can't expect to evoke meaningful change if you don't have the data, which, going back to the acronym I was talking about, if you don't have the data to sort of support and really get in depth about like, what am I even actually trying to change here? Like, it's almost relating back to like a SMART goal. If I'm sure lots of people are familiar with SMART goals. I can't remember that whole acronym.
Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, which is also kind of the same. I never
Yeah.
like that. And then time, meaning like set a time frame and, and an actual
meaning. But that's an acronym that outline, like, it's one thing to be like, this will be a popular one for the new year, but like, I want to lose weight. It's like, okay, well, there's nothing smart about that. Like, it's how much weight do you want to lose, in what time frame? How are you is that achievable?
Do you want to lose muscle and bone?
Yeah.
Do you want to lose fat?
What kind of weight do you want to lose?
Yeah.
Like, what's the regime of how you're going to go about doing that? So, kind of relating that back to this dopamine example, it's like data is creating the SMART goal, which is just being realistic and honest with yourself, and maybe like making yourself squirm and cringe about like, what are we actually dealing with here? Like, what am I over consuming? How much am I actually over consuming it? Not just saying like, oh, I feel like I'm on my phone all the time. It's like, get into that settings part and be like, no, I have 350 pickups a day. All of my free time, I'm just going for my phone. Like, I need to get really specific and into the nitty-gritty about what that looks like.
Hitting buttons to avoid feelings.
Oh, yes.
Like, there's not a button on that thing that's gonna help you, but like, so many times I've witnessed in myself and in others where, there's a little bit of an awkward feeling or an unknown, uncertain feeling, and they pick up this pacifier, the phone pacifier, to soothe them and distract them. And that's really what pickups can tell you.
Right.
And it'll tell you like exactly what app you're using when you first pick it up. It tells you how many times each. For like, you opened Instagram 17 times on these pickups. You opened the score 8 times on these pickups. So you probably
picked up your gambling app this many times, or your Facebook, or whatever it is, right?
So like, we all have these things.
Yeah.
I have these things.
I certainly
Jenna
have
has these things. She's addicted to porn.
I can't stop.
I won't stop.
And I feel like we, not just in this page, but in other pages, we really have like harped on the phone usage a lot. And again, this doesn't have to be specific to phone usage. It's, I think, just easy for most people to relate to, which is why we tend to talk about it.
And just to start to use it as a tool that it mostly improves your life. When it's Saturday or Sunday and you just want to chill on the couch and scroll, and you know why you're doing these things and what it's doing to your brain, then that's okay. That's good. It's better than to mindlessly do these things every single day of your life with no knowledge of what's happening to your brain, and then you're feeling like shit and gray and no motivation and your life is crumbling. I'd rather you know these things and use them as a tool most of the time.
Well, and that's actually a nice segue to the next letter in the acronym, which is objective. So D is for data. We're kind of taking recon of how much we are participating in this behavior or addiction. O is objectives, which is then reflecting on what that drug, what that action, what that app, whatever it is actually doing for you, and how does it help maybe alleviate an uncomfortable feeling. Like, most of the times we're doing these actions, it's, again, relating it back to the dopamine, it's because we're getting some sort of pleasure out of it. So how is that behavior creating pleasure, or what's it doing for you?
And it can do a bunch of things at once, right? It can also avoid pain. It can stop you from being alone with your thoughts,
right? So P is problems. So like any behavior, there's positives and there's negatives. So in O, you've sort of identified like what that action or behavior is helping to achieve, but it probably, most likely, definitely doesn't come without the flip side of having problems, right? So what are that action or that drug or that behavior's downsides or unintended consequences? And again, is it health related? Is it relationship related? Is it, not in line with your morals, right? So taking some stock of that. And then, so once these 3 letters, once you've sort of done recon on what the behavior is, what it's positively doing for you and what it's negatively doing for you, then comes time for A, which is abstinence.
Everyone's favorite.
Step 4, abstinence. So in the book, she actually recommends stopping doing that behavior for a month. You know, I've heard, I don't know if this is actually based in science or not, but I feel like a popular sort of phrase to say is like, anyone can make a change in 21 days. Like, it takes 3 weeks to make a change. So she recommends stopping doing that behavior, using that drug or whatever you're doing for a month, and says that's the minimum time to reset the brain's reward pathway, which is essentially your dopaminergic pathway. So stop doing it for a month. And then M, which stands for mindfulness, kind of, I would say, goes in tandem with that, where as you're abstaining, you also have to observe your thoughts, your feelings, your pain, your emotions during that time of abstaining to see how you feel during that time. So, for example, if you're trying to not look at your phone or at a certain app, even for a day, right? Like when we did the limit your social media challenge, you might go to reach for your phone, catch yourself and be like, oh, can't do that. And then perhaps you have a journal that's like, well, why did I reach for it in that moment? Was I bored? Was I awkward? Was I uncomfortable? Did I genuinely want to look something up and just forgot about it? Like, again, they don't always have to be negative things, but just taking stock of why you actually did that action in that time. So mindfulness around your action. Then after the month, you participate in insight, so I, which is how did the period of abstinence go, or how did it change your life? So then it's, you know, going back in that journal or that self-reflection and thinking about, you know, how many times did I take note that I did it just out of boredom? Or how many times did I, you know, genuinely want to look something up and I'm just a curious person? Like, again, there can be positives or negatives to that. And then N is next steps, which is, again, a reflection of, do you want to keep abstaining or do you want to return to the behavior? And there can be some good ways to return to the behavior, right? Maybe you've just taken note of like, yeah, actually when I look at my phone, I notice most of the time I do want to go to Google to watch this Huberman video, or I want to go to Spotify to listen to this podcast. It's not always going to like my financial app or my gambling app or my TikTok or whatever it is. But now that you have all the information to make that decision, it's like, do I have to put certain governors on this, or do I have to abstain from it completely? Like, am I just watching way too much porn and I have to I have to delete Pornhub from my phone or whatever it is?
Can you create some internal buffers and some safety nets, like screen time, or like certain days I don't do this, or, you know, only certain hours of the day, like not the first hour, not the last hour of the day, all those things, like figuring out, okay, do I need to go completely scorched earth, or do I need some internal buffers?
Right.
And then
the last one is experiment, which is, you know, now that you've gone through this reflection period, this month of abstaining, and then reflecting on that abstaining period, what does this life look like now, either without that behavior at all, or if you are going to do this behavior in moderation, what does that look like? So, and again, this would all be available either if you buy the book, download the audiobook, or honestly, if you just search Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke online, this would be like outlined for you on Google. But just to sort of wrap it up, the acronym is dopamine, which is data, objectives, problems, abstinence, mindfulness, insight, next steps, and then experiment.
Yay.
Huzzah.
Now, to pick holes in that.
Go for it. I didn't write the book. I won't take it personally.
Just the abstinence part, right? Like we already talked about this before we hit record. But for me, being like, what's a bigger barrier to entry? Like, hey, I need you to stop. You know that behavior that is destroying your life? Well, you're going to stop it for a month. Mm-hmm. That's going to scare the shit out of people. That's going to scare them away. They're not going to do it.
Maybe it has to scare them, though. I think it depends what the activity or the behavior is, right? Like, if you, I don't know, I think more of, like, drugs, for example. Like, if you're a rampant cocaine user.
Of course.
Like, you can't be like, just stop cocaine for one day and we'll see how it goes. Like, something maybe more pharmacologically related, you would have to abstain for a full month to see the effects.
Yeah.
But I think where you're going is if you're saying, don't go on TikTok for a full month.
If this, So, there's a difference, right? Slightly. There's a difference between heroin and meth and cocaine and going on Instagram on your phone. Mm-hmm. But if you've been on, if you've opened these apps, again, trace this back to the end of July with, I think, page 9 or page 10, which we're talking about. Like, if you've opened these apps every single day for as far back as you can remember, so months, years, like, when's the last time you didn't open Facebook or Instagram? And if you've done it every single day, to be like, okay, so here's your problem and this is how you're going to fix it. You're going to stop doing it for a month. That's a huge difference. But if we just buy ourselves a little bit of that press box time, like for me, on Mondays, I don't open Instagram. There's been some times when I take my phone into the washroom and my brain immediately opens it. I'm like, oh my God. So I immediately close it. But like, if you just give yourself that one day a week, and if you try to tell me like, oh, I can't not do that one day, well, you're choosing not to. Maybe a month you can like really try to convince yourself and me like, oh, I can't do a month. But I'd be hard pressed to convince you that I can't do it for one day. Right. So that abstinence, I would say, depending on what it is, doesn't have to be a month. If you buy yourself one day and then realizing like, okay, so you realize really how addicted and how often you use it when you do cut it out for that one day. So that's what I would recommend. If you are going to cut out something on your phone, I would say, well, let's just start on Mondays, or let's start on Fridays, or whatever day it is. You can 100% do that. And when you stop doing that, you're going to have to fill those gas tanks in another way. Mm-hmm. All that distraction stuff and all that little pleasure seeking, well, maybe we start to fill it in good, productive ways, like some voluntary pain ways.
Right. And I think that, I tend to agree with you. Like, if we're talking about, serious drug or alcohol addiction, or honestly, even like sex and porn addiction, or gambling addiction, right? Like, not opening fucking Betano for 24 hours or Bet99 or whatever other god-awful apps there are out there. Like, that's probably not going to cut it. But yes, because we are talking a bit specifically about the phone, like the technology, or it doesn't even have to be phone, right? Like the TV addiction, the computer addiction, like whatever it is, when we're talking about those quick dopamine hits from apps or technology, I do think starting with a day is a safe starting place, because it kind of allows you to lump a lot of those steps from that dopamine model all in one, right? You're abstaining for a day, but while you're abstaining, you're also, maybe it takes 2 days. Maybe the first day you have to look at your pickups and all that, right, and gather some info. But then while you're abstaining, you're also journaling about how you feel. And then maybe you're also trying to replace it with another more productive behavior, which I think is what you were just going to get into
how you feel
and allude to. But I would say that the replacing, which is what you were just starting to talk about, doesn't work if we're talking about like smoking addiction, for example. Like, you can't be like, I'm going to stop smoking for a day, smoking cigarettes, let's say, for a day, but in that time I'm going to start replacing it with eating McDonald's instead.
Yeah.
Like, so it very much does depend on what were the severity and what kind of behavior or action we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
But in the context of social media, I think that's a good starting point.
For me, that's, I can only speak for myself with that, but like, okay, it was Instagram, so I'm going to stop that on Monday, and I've been doing that for, I guess, more than a few months, probably since like August.
Since July, or August, whenever we wrote that page.
And yeah, it's made a huge difference. I don't feel as drawn to it. Come Tuesday, not as drawn to it. I don't spend as much time on it the other days. You just have to kind of break up that pattern. And I've been choosing the voluntary pain.
The frogs.
Yeah, eating those frogs.
So reflecting back on it now, just because we're talking specifically about like Instagram and social media, what do you think it was doing for you at the time? If you were using it on Mondays or too often, or whatever the case was.
I guess the first, like, there is the brain chemistry part as far as like getting these little hits of pleasure, these little dopamine hits, but it's more so the filling time. So during times of boredom, or times of boredom, or even just times of non-stimulant,
right?
Like, not even boredom, just like, oh, there's a break in this, or there's a break in a TV commercial, or I have 10 minutes in my car before my next session.
Right.
It's just filling up these days so you're not alone with your thoughts and your mind. So it was probably more so that, and then you just kind of get addicted to that cycle. Right. So that was probably the big one.
Gotcha. And so now that you are abstaining from being on your phone on Mondays or social media on Mondays, what have you replaced it with instead?
Frogs.
What kind of frogs we talking? What kind of frogs you licking?
No, honestly, you don't have to. It's not that hard to replace it. It's really only like probably 30 to 45 minutes where you would have to replace it. So it's like, okay, so I'll listen to audiobooks in my car, or I'll go for a walk for that 15 minutes, or I will, I don't even know, but it's certainly not replacing it with a negative thing.
Or even just presentness, I would argue.
Yeah, sometimes
just sitting in
sometimes
silence.
it's just doing nothing.
And being okay with doing nothing, because that's another thing, certainly in 2023, 2023 in North America. This obviously isn't the case in other, countries and part of the world, but you never have to be bored.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing.
You never have to just sit and do nothing if you don't want to.
Yeah.
There's always somebody to connect with online. There's always some technology to call. There's always something to look up.
Yeah. It's turning yourself into a human doing. As opposed to a human being. So being more of a human being. And there's that quote that we've all probably seen before, where it's like, don't just do something, stand there. Where if you think about those words, the opposite is, don't just stand there, do something. But what we really need to do more of is nothing, and just sitting there. And when we experience the boredom or the little bit of the squirminess, that's like, okay, you got that craving. Now let's go get it in a positive way, as opposed to just these immediate pleasure machines.
Right. Yeah. So
the choosing to put yourself through voluntary pain so that you can experience the pleasure, and that's so. that's what I've really kind of noticed in myself is, just being more present, not having to constantly fill the time. And then that, because I have these needs, I have these 6 human needs, I have this dopaminergic pathway, I'm going to have to meet it in better ways. I have to meet them, just like with food. If you take away all the junk food, well, you're still going to be hungry, but you're going to eat better food.
Right. It's a good way to look at it.
But can you stop eating junk food for a day to buy yourself that buffer, to give yourself some space to breathe, to make better decisions, as opposed to your insulin and, your
ghrelin and leptin,
all that stuff just running the show? Mm-hmm. Can you take back control of it as opposed to it controlling you? Mm-hmm. And we wanted to talk a little bit as far as like phone gambling, because it ties into that.
We were sort of pondering doing a separate page specifically on gambling, but honestly I feel like it kind of relates better to this episode. I'm not an online gambler, so I also don't know if I can talk for an hour about online gambling. I don't know enough about it.
No, I think 5 minutes should do.
Yeah.
But
just because it's so relatable to the quick hits, and now they've changed laws in, I can't speak to the US, but in Ontario, conveniently over the pandemic when everybody was at home, they changed some laws about access to gambling from your phone and personal devices.
Doing like same game betting, and you can in-game betting and all that stuff basically just draws you in more.
And advertising, which they also
reversed.
They
allowed celebrities to do it. Now they reversed it after a few months.
Except it's too late.
It's too fucking late. Yeah. So if you think about gambling by itself, as far as going to physical places and casinos, hitting the chinos. Okay, so if you go into a casino, it's like, oh yeah, we know gambling can be a serious problem when you have to physically go somewhere. So in 2004, there's a study that says if you live within 10 miles of a casino, you have more than double the chance of developing a gambling problem. So that's 7% versus 3%. So 7% chance if you live within 10 miles versus just a 3% chance if you live further away. Mm-hmm. So that's within 10 miles of a casino, 7%. So,
and I don't know if you know this, but I'm curious what they would quantify as a quote-unquote gambling problem.
That's
like,
a good point.
Is it how much money you're losing, the frequency in which you go? That I don't know. But we all, I guess, have a general sense of what it would mean to have an issue with gambling, I suppose. Yeah,
I think it's when it's the same thing with any other drug. It's like when it's
perhaps inhibiting your ability to go to work, or
when it's inhibiting your everyday life, your everyday finances. Michael Jordan has a serious gambling problem, but he has so much money that it's not a problem. So it's just like, he has a gambling addiction, but even if he's losing millions of dollars, he has billions of dollars. So it's not impacting his life.
Well, it's not impacting his finances, but sure as shit, it's probably impacting his ability to spend time with his wife and children and family.
Don't piss off MJ, okay? He's looking for reasons.
Those Space Jam royalties are still coming in hot.
He's looking for reasons to be pissed off. Okay, so that's if you live within 10 miles of a casino. So what's the distance between your pocket and your hand? Is that less than 10 miles? Because your phone is now a casino.
Right.
So when we see more and more people getting these problems, it's like, well, that's because there's only about 10 inches between them and a casino. Mm-hmm. And then it's just forced and dumped on you. If you watch any sporting event, there's probably going to be at least 2 gambling ads in there. Maybe the ads impact you or not, but I think the biggest thing is the way that these companies are also hijacking your dopamine systems.
Oh, it's insane.
Right?
Like again, I don't have any gambling apps on my phone, but I remember we were watching or listening to something where they were talking about how, like, obviously there's so much marketing and psychology behind, never mind casinos, but of course how gambling apps work as well. And it's like, so many gambling apps will offer you, like, sign up today and get $50 free dollars of credits or whatever.
Put $100 in, we'll match $100.
Sure.
Yeah.
But then they'll actually also send you reminders if you haven't been on the app for a while of, like, on February 7th, remember when you won $150?
Yeah.
Like, yay, and it'll give you some fanfare or, like, fancy, bright things on your phone.
It's trying to remind you of a time when you had pleasure using their app. Mm-hmm. The same way that Uber Eats is going to, like,
yeah, that's more relatable to me.
Yeah.
Like, we don't order Uber that often, and every fucking day I get Uber, like, send me notifications, be like, Jenna, we miss you. We haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah.
Take 40% off
if
your
you
next
haven't
order.
used it in a while, they send you things to entice you to get back on. And the same thing with these gambling apps.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder why it's becoming more and more of an issue.
Of course.
And it scares the shit out of me.
It should scare the shit out of you.
I've been saying it for a couple of years now of, like, watch. This is going to be a serious problem because I knew about this study, and when you have a casino in your pocket now and you're already addicted to your phone, now you have one of the most, like, gambling scares the shit out of me because it can get anybody.
Of course.
Heroin, there's certain life circumstances and there's some bridges you have to kind of cross to get to. Mm-hmm. But gambling can get anybody. You have you go and you win in a slot machine, like, one time, and you get this huge rush.
And you're just trying to chase
now
it to
you're
get it
chasing
again.
the dragon. So it can get anybody. And so if it has you, it's
Gamblers got a hold of you.
It's understandable, but, like, to really try to put yourself in the press box of your own life to watch, like, why am I doing this? These companies are basically just using me and using my brain chemistry to extract you from your money or you from your time.
I would have to imagine that's another reason. Never mind the massive dopamine and potentially opioid hit from the win itself.
Yeah.
But when you're losing, there's also the enticing and the string that you can win it back. And when we're talking about people losing, hundreds of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and your livelihood, like, going back to some 6 human needs stuff, like your security, your certainty, your security, your housing, your ability to pay for, like, food and shelter and stuff is dependent on that, then we just get into a whole other realm of fuckery that I don't even know. It's freaking me out a little bit to talk about. I don't even know if I want to go down that road.
No. Yeah. It's
and we'll end it here. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So I don't know. I wanted to talk a little bit about it, just because I see it becoming more of an issue, and I can only imagine more and more of us are going to be captured by it, because gambling is that one thing that can seemingly capture anybody. But yeah, like, with it on our phones now and with all the sports betting, I know that there's probably so many early 20s, late 20s, mid 30s males who are really captured by it. And I think using some of these things that we talked about, as far as, like, okay, if I am opening this every single day, maybe I start with not opening it on one day, and I don't fill it with something negative, I fill it with something positive, and I try to build that knowledge of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really what the theme of today, well, hopefully what the theme of today's episode is like, again, I am not a neuroscientist. While I enjoy reading about this stuff and nerding out on it, like there's so many other resources out there to learn about the, neuro and biochemistry behind addiction and dopamine. And if there's a way we can include even like that after school video in the notes somewhere for people, I think that would be valuable. But just in whatever format works for you, whether it's podcasts, whether it's going on Google Scholar, whether it's watching, animated videos, learn a little bit about just your own biology and your own chemistry so you have some understanding of how these things get us and like how this works in your body and why it works. And then from there, it's doing a bit of a recon mission of like, what are your vices? Because we all have them, right? Whether it's social media, whether it's gambling, whether it's food, whether it's porn, there's everybody's got something. So take stock of what that is. And then is it a behavior that has some value to you sometimes? Is it adding no value to your life? Is it breaking you down and causing destruction in your life? But that again requires some cringy moments and some reflection of, as you say, being in the press box. And then from there, I mean, we just talked about this dopamine acronym today. That's just one way that you can possibly reflect to evoke change. But then once you have all the information and do the reflection, then you sort of have the information you need to decide if you want to change, if change is required, and maybe some skills on how to do it.
And we'll end with this quote, and this is from that animated video we were talking about that's narrated by Andrew Huberman as he talks about dopamine and what's going on. And the quote is, "The problem is not pleasures. The problem is that pleasure experienced without prior requirement for pursuit is terrible for us. We're going to increasingly find that those who will be successful are going to be those people who can create their own internal buffers. They're going to be the people who can control the relationship to pleasures, because the proximity of pleasures and availability is the problem." So create your own internal buffers, because pleasures are not going anywhere. They're only going to get more and more and more. So if you can't control them, they're going to control you. And so choosing the right kinds of pain to put yourself through that improve your life, and you'll be able to experience pleasure on the other side of that.
Definitely. Grab a live frog and eat it, everyone.
Lick that toad, guys.